We are now going to focus on the investors, what is focusing their minds and what's keeping them awake at night, and what do they rank as their long and their short-term challenges. So please join me in welcoming to the stage, I'm just madly looking to see where they all are, Sam Mostyn, the Chair of Aware Super and Non-Executive Director of Mirvac Group, Paul Schroeder, Chief Executive of Australian Super, and Sonia Stortel-Rixon, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Hester. Please join me in thanking our panel very much. And don't forget, questions through the app early and often. Welcome, thank you very much for being here. I asked each of you what keeps you awake at night offline, and I'm actually surprised any of you get any sleep given the breadth of the answers that I got. But I thought a really good place to start might actually be your very existence and how the massive pool of super dollars is viewed. Paul, when you go to London or you go to New York, what do they say to you, and how would you compare that to what people say to you here?
Oh, great. Hello, everybody. Thanks for staying all the way through. I'd like to start by acknowledging traditional custodians of the land and just use that as a prompt to remind all of us that super's not yet super for everybody. On your specific question, what's astounding when you leave the country is how much love there is for the Australian superannuation system everywhere else and how much complication there is here. So last week we were in London. The board met in London. We've got a number of really important assets there, and politicians of both sides were very happy and wanted to meet with us, including like Jeremy Hunt was delivering the budget that week and spent half an hour with us talking about the pension system and how would they make their system more like our system. Same in the States. We've got 40 or 45 people there, and we had Mayor Adams come and help us open the office. The Americans are astounded. They can't believe that we've got equal representation boards. They can't believe that we're focused. Like somebody even said to me, "Oh, how do you do ESG investing?" I said, "We don't do ESG investing. We do investing and think about ESG." Like we belittle or we allow risks to the system that is loved by everybody else. Like really, they would desperately love a system like this, which means people are going to retire with more money. The proportion of the cost of the age pension as a proportion of GDP is going to be 2% in the future when there's even more older people. So more people will have more money. It'll cost the economy less, and it's really well run. Gee, sounds all right to me.
It sounds all right to you, and it sounds so simple. So why is it, do you think, that you're in such a contested space? And do you think you are destined to forever be in a contested space?
No. We'll be forever in contest about what we do or don't do and how we conduct ourselves or we don't conduct ourselves. And that's completely right. So if we think that, if you just think about everybody's future retirement is in our collective hands. So it's completely right for people to contest whether we do things the right way, whether we should do one or other thing. But I think the idea of should there be a universal, preserved superannuation system, I think that contest will pass. And actually the only people who are narky about it are just raking over old, cold coals.
Sam, they might be old, cold coals, but they still manage to make headlines. And I guess that there's the politics around the it's your money, should you be able to get it out and buy a house. But there's also the bigger conversation around super for nation building. Do you see both those conversations as potentially dangerous?
So first of all, I just joined Paul. Thank you for those remarks about super's not super for all, and acknowledging country just to reflect on the fact that we're all responsible investors in superannuation. And I really enjoyed last year the fact that our board, with our management team, spent considerable time talking about whether we would actually talk about the voice as an organisation, as a fund. And the reason we did was that no First Nations people have a voice about retirement age.
Sure.
And so just to back you in on why it's so important, we acknowledge that issue of who has a voice in super, because it takes me to that notion of nation building. I think these two things are very interconnected. So the critique of super in Australia and I think the lazy language of attacking a system that actually in and of itself is nation building. Before we even get to the question of what we invest in, Paul's just described a country that has a way of actually managing its retirement costs, talks about dignity for those who might otherwise have only lived on the age pension and felt impoverished. That's what makes a great nation, the idea of finding a way to help people into a long retirement. Most people will retire for 20 or 30 years, not the 10 or 15 that once might have been the case. And so I think our big challenge as an industry working right across the Australian public is to start talking a little bit differently, using the language of what matters to Australians right now, and that's long-term security, having superannuation funds that actually put the financial interests of the member first, are invested in the kind of responsible projects that most Australians want to see us in, but do it through the lens of a significant return. Don't sacrifice return for those investments. And so I think that if we go down a path of it's your money, the same way we did with you don't know, vote no, and just let people get lazy about thinking this is one of the great assets of this country. Paul's explained why around the world we are such the envy of economies that wish they'd done what we started 30 years ago. That's where we've got to, I think, have a generous conversation. It's why we have a Superannuation Members Council now to speak on behalf of the members of superannuation funds, so we can take the language away from, I think, some of the laziness that describes the funds, particularly the industry funds, as somehow dominated by Labor. And when you actually look at what's going on in superannuation, it's becoming a sophisticated, important part of our economy. At 30 years old, doing some of the most incredible heavy lifting in a responsible way that gives confidence to the country as 5 million Australians start to enter into retirement. 5 million Australians about to go into retirement. And so I think we need to be really confident about that conversation and the fact that the trustees involved in this really care about that outcome for the country and for Australians.
Do you agree that it's old cold coals and that it will go away pretty quickly? Or do you worry about it?
I'm a bit more worried than Paul in terms of how quickly a political line, wherever it is generated from, however it comes to bear, on a country that's actually got so used to these reforms that doesn't reflect and say these are worth protecting. And actually, we actually want to talk about that. And then there is a really interesting contest of ideas that we need to have with Australians about housing crisis. Money sitting in a pool that is compounding over time for your retirement, and being told actually, and we saw it in COVID, we saw what happened when people were given a chance to raid their super, and how quickly you will deteriorate the compounding benefit to your future for things that are immediately, mostly devaluing, or driving inflation or property prices. So again, we need to have a sophisticated, respectful conversation for all Australians, young and those entering into retirement, to say it is your money, and because you've put it all together under a compulsory scheme, we want to make sure it earns more and more for you over time, and it's been very successful. We want your retirement to be dignified, and it won't be if we raid the most, as you said. I mean, it is to be the envy of the world and not back that in and then enter into a respectful conversation about whose money it is and how we manage it, I think would not do us justice as a country. I think we're better. I think we're a smart country that needs to be smart about super.
Sonia, how do you see the existential crisis that I'm calling it that, overblowing it a bit? But
for superannuation? I would reinforce everything that Paul and Sam's just said. I think superannuation and being really... That sounds ominous. Just to wake you all up. UFO landing. I think to go back to the objective of superannuation, which is to deliver retirement income for members, and provide dignity and supplement the age pension and other forms of government support. I think we've just talked to some of the economic benefits that provides, both in the long term, but also in the short term, in terms of capital availability. We're now net exporters of capital. It's really changed the dynamics for the Australian economy in many ways. And I think sometimes it's very easy when there's a pot of money to maybe sort of see it as a solution to many other challenges that we face. And I think affordability at the moment and the housing crisis is a very real challenge, and it's a very real issue that needs addressing. And I think many of us are leaning into that challenge and trying to figure out how we can earn a strong risk-adjusted return while having an impact and helping to to alleviate that crisis. But it is not the job of superannuation to be the government. It is not the job of superannuation to provide employment relief or to provide responsiveness when some of these other programs fall a bit short. And I think it would be lazy of us as a nation to maybe not address those real challenges that we're leaning into and facing in a way that's much more sort of strategic and sensible, and just create other challenges down the track by taking the easy route.
So do your members see themselves as nation builders? And now I'm talking about the housing, the defence, the climate transition that the Treasurer refers to.
No, they don't care about any of that. It's like serious. Like we know the qual, we know the quant. People would much rather that the nation was being built, but really it gets down to their balance and their family funding their retirement. So it's that doesn't mean we shouldn't be creative and imaginative, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't be engaging with the broader topics. But if you're asking what do the vast bulk of members say, the vast bulk of members say, we want you to make us the best risk-adjusted return. We want you to help us save more than we would have saved, earn more than we could have by ourselves, protect our assets so that, usually in conjunction with the age pension, I've got more money to live a better life in retirement. Now, if in going about that, you can make a contribution to other things as well, that's good. But on this housing issue, we do have a really serious housing problem, like an utterly serious housing problem. When it used to cost twice a family's household income to buy a house, and now it's 6.5 times, and it's worse in Sydney. We've got a problem, but I would just urge people, don't wreck one policy that's working, which is how do we fund an ageing population, build a capital pool, become a net exporter of equity capital. That's a policy that's working. Don't wreck something that's working to address something that's not working. Just address what's not working, which is mostly not about financing, it's about supply.
Sam?
I would only add a rider, Paul. Every one of our members wants that return, and they expect, and that's why your future, your super matters, because people are making genuine comparisons about how we're all doing. But I do think there's quite a growing membership base that actually cares about responsible investment of their money. And I'm not sure they want to sacrifice any return to do that, but there's an expectation that you'll do both. And so that's why so many of us are involved in very significant decarbonisation strategies in the portfolios that we're in, and have our investment teams working really hard on what is the role of superannuation investment into the national agenda on decarbonisation. We do a lot on affordable housing in the way that makes sense for our funds to be involved, not to solve the policy crisis, but to do the work that actually is provided to us as investment return opportunities. And I think, particularly with younger superannuants coming into our system, they are very interested in not having arms, not investing very carefully around what we care about as a nation, with an expectation of that return. So I think that's why I think we are in the business generally of nation building. We're reflecting, I think, a lot of what Australians want and how they derive their that income and that profit. And we work, I think we all on this panel work really hard to be responsible investors on behalf of the country and our members.
But just on this question of appropriate risk-adjusted return and no trade-off, even with your investments, we heard from Zoe in the earlier panel about the need for greater demand. But of course, if it's more expensive, customers will say, well, I'm not going to, my shareholders or my investors won't support me to buy this. Somewhere something has to give. Not everything can be a win-win. And I just wonder about whether you can nation build, you can help address all the issues that this country needs and still get the absolute best top dollar. I mean, to be frank, if you wanted the best top dollar in the last year, you would have been in fossil fuels heavily. So I just wonder about where that balance comes into the equation.
Did you want to comment on that, Sonia?
Thanks. Yeah. Look, I think you're absolutely right in terms of it is risk-adjusted return that is primary, and I don't think we have any licence. We have to act in our members' best financial interest, and that is what drives our investment decision making. But I also don't think that is completely disconnected from having impact. And I think we think through integration, you can really address both of those things together. And so when we're thinking about how do you pursue investment opportunities whilst also driving change, you've got to start with the strategy. And for us, we start with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal framework, and we look at the areas where we want to have impact, and then we develop deliberate strategy around those things. So climate transition, great example where we know that we've got to add supply and we've got to be able to sort of inject our capital in a way that makes risk-adjusted returns. And so there are deals that we really enjoy and really like, and where it's a very easy decision. And then there's deals we've had to walk away from because we're taking negative price risk, which doesn't make sense for our members. And so I think the reality is there's a capital shortage in that risk bucket. And what we really need to do is find a way to drive a transition in Australia and around the world in a way that actually helps us to achieve the change that's needed in the minimum cost way, because we are having to spend trillions of dollars to transition the economy to a more sustainable future. And we need to do that without wasting money. We need to do it in a way that's really capital efficient, that allows us to drive as fast as we possibly can. And the reality is that's hard. And I think we've seen in the US policy opportunity. Obviously the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, has had a huge impetus in the US in terms of the transition. Now that's helped really leverage private capital. We've seen a huge boom in capex in that market. But it's also meant that the government predicted that program would be about 300 million. It's now running at over $1 trillion. Like, the demand sort of suggests that maybe the government's been a bit too generous in the rewards that have been on offer. And I think we've got to get that balance right, where we find programs to provide the support. We connect people who can connect certainty of offtake with people who are willing to underwrite risk. And do it in a way that really tries to minimise any profit taking, so that we can all just get on with the job.
So, Ellie, I think the issue about the risk return is where to focus is who should carry the risk and who's going to pay. There's no doubt the funds here will be a substantial part of providing capital for the energy transition and a number of other big long-term issues. But government's got a role by creating policy certainty. That takes out a risk. There's other parts government can play to take risk out. But there's 3.4 million members in Australian Super. 427 of them are called Tatiana, and those Tatianas have an average balance of $53,000. So it's not reasonable for anybody to say Tatiana should carry more risk than the government's prepared to take, or the state governments are prepared to take, or the other participants. So that's what I meant about being imaginative and creative. We need to be right up for this dialogue, and so does that fly. But I don't think we would want to say that the risk of this major transition has to be carried by Tatiana and all the other members.
But I just want to stay with you for a minute, Paul, because of course it does go to Origin quite nicely.
Sure.
And we did hear the Origin chair's views on that transaction a little earlier. Can you give us your reflections on that?
Sure. What did he say? I was out of the room in that bit.
Nothing you wouldn't expect him to say,
all right. Well,
except that you're all very friendly and you certainly don't want to change the board.
No, they're a very talented group and they've got great assets. To me, it comes down as they're going to play a really significant role in the energy transition. They've got great assets and we think it's worth more than they think. I think we in Brookfield think exactly the same about what it's worth, and they just had a view about how much they could get it for, basically. So for all the people in this room, if you've got a car that you think's worth $14,000 and it's insured for 12.5, you don't sell it for 9. It's simple as that. We think it's worth much more and it'll end up being worth much more, and only time will tell if that's true. But investing is always about the future, and we have a very strong conviction about the future valuation of that company. And Scott's right to say we had some really good engagement with them, but I do want to call out some behaviour which was despicable, right? Like, actually, not by the company. I'm not saying that, but for people to say that funds who had one view or another were either wreckers of the environment or not, or some of these other spurious kind of things that were talked about. We're investors. We think it's a great company with great assets and good management. We think it's worth more. That's it. But what was going on, the backgrounding that was going on, the legal threats that were being made, the all sorts of pressure that was being brought to bear, I reckon we're better than that. I think we saw lots of behaviour that is not becoming of grown-ups in a mature democracy.
And you're probably going to see a lot more of it, would you bet?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be up to us, all of us, to do the Michelle Obama and just go high and go high and go high. And I just deliberately made some remarks here because some of that behaviour at the time was appalling. But all we ever did was come out every week and say we have or we haven't bought shares and we think it's worth more than we're being offered. And there's other funds in this room who said we would sell it at that price. And that's completely their right as well. The investment thesis is the investment thesis, fundamentals brought together by the people who are paid to do that. I have no truck with people who are prepared to sell, and nor should anyone have any truck with us for not being prepared to sell when we thought it was worth a great deal more.
Sam, did you want to...
I was just going to come back to that risk issue and risk return and the intersection with this panel and the one just before. So all Australians who have their money invested with us take a risk on us. They're not guaranteed. They put their money with us for the return that we say we can generate under conditions that they expect. And now, in Aware's case, that is a responsible investor. And they expect a certain return for that, and we are on the hook for that. And we want to live within the very strict regulatory regime, and the regulators clear that we deal with all of matters that we are required to do to give certainty and security to our members, because it is their money that we are the stewards of on their behalf. So they've already taken that risk on us. So I then think, to I think Zoe's point earlier about generally that last panel, where is super in the higher risk investment in the future of, say, renewables? And I look back and think, actually, we're a part of a system that you must have in order to release other forms of capital or debt from other players who don't carry that risk on behalf of others, where we've got to secure that return. And we do something really important. I mean, I was in executive roles for years where we talked about corporate social responsibility, ESG, and none of our investors were checking on us at all. I happen to think we did a good job in the companies I was in. We now, our team, a big shout out to the teams in the investment, your investment team, to go out and spend time building relationships with the assets we're either invested in through equity or that we own outright, and sit and go through carbon transition plans, getting actually certainty that everything they're saying is something we can validate on behalf of the people whose money we're investing, whose risk they're putting with us. And I just think that's an extraordinary part of the transition. Aware has had a transition plan for our entire portfolio for some years, and we have said to our members we will have transitioned to net zero across the entirety of our investments, equity and direct assets, however we hold them, by 2050. Net zero. And that's something we say every year in our reports, and we have to take that promise into the assets, into the market, and expect behaviour from the market, which we think, if they're lifting, they will be investing in renewables, because that will be their job depending on the sectors they're in. It's not our job to put that money at risk in the way that I guess banks and others could. But without us, I just think we're an extraordinary part of a system that holds ourselves accountable and responsible, and our people are working so hard to make those assessments of whether we're seeing greenwashing or not. Where's your net zero plan? How do we know it's real? How do we test that? That's remarkable, I think, in terms of, and that's just environment. Get into social, labour reform, labour markets, modern slavery, gender equality, safety. We're building better companies by virtue of the way we invest on behalf of those who are risking their money with us to get a return.
So, Paul, given that you're very happy with the management of Origin, do you want a board seat?
No, we don't have any current plans to have a director. We want them to be very successful, and we reserve the right, where we can, to consider appointing directors, but the prism of all of our thoughts is the creation of long-term value, asset by asset, security by security, and in very much the way you just said, Sam, credible plans, credibly executed in the creation of long-term value. And so our current view about Origin is that it's got a path to generating long-term value.
No, I understand that. I suppose my question is broader, and that is that as you all get bigger,
yes,
your holdings get bigger,
yes,
your influence can get bigger, and no
yes,
doubt you will want it to be bigger,
yes,
is what we've seen with Hester going to become a much more common factor with superannuation, that you get a big stake and you go for
I
the
think
board
you
seat?
should definitely ask Sonia a question about Hester.
I will, but I'm asking you first. You don't rule it out, but is it something...
I don't rule Hester doing anything in or out.
Keep him on the edge of his seat, that's right.
So you're just reserving your right to in the future? That's what
We
you
already
do,
appoint one director to a publicly listed
Right,
company,
yeah.
and she's a terrific company director, and was fit for purpose, making a terrific contribution there and to our non-executive director pool. And we've got a program, we've got an asset owner philosophy and principles that underpin that program. We find people, we train people. And a lot of this discussion is about listed assets, but for unlisted assets, we've got multiple directors across those unlisted assets. And as I say, we've only got one in listed markets. But yeah, we reserve the right to, but it's all about would making that appointment make that board more effective and therefore choose a better CE and therefore have the possibility of creating better long-term value. I'm only pushing back because I do think there's kind of an idea that says, just because you can, you will. But actually the judgment needs to be, and if we did, would it create more value for members, Tatiana and the rest, or not? Don't do it or not do it for any other reason.
Sonia?
Look, I think we all vote on directors today. Like, this is not new. This is how most people in this room would do that today. And I think that's based on principles of good governance. And I think that will continue. I think we will all continue to sort of make sure that the requisite board is acting appropriately, that they've got the right skills and the right mix of skills. And I think increasingly through our active ownership, we're engaging with boards on those matters. I think we're engaging with boards both in listed markets and unlisted markets. We're engaging with partners about who they have put on boards and making sure that their skills are appropriate and that their gender diversity is appropriate, and we're getting all the benefits of diversity and inclusion that we need in those decision-making forums. They've got the right, considerations of cyber and the right considerations of responsible investment. There's just, I think this is just part of good investing, and I think we'll all continue to do that to drive performance.
Just to go back to what we started with, and Sam, if I can maybe put it to you, but the issue around the board seat, which is, I take that it's not a huge issue, but I wonder whether it is an issue when you look at the optics from a political perspective. And I'm thinking of the nemesis Andrew Bragg, who was terribly upset by Australian Super and the bid for Origin. I mean, the quote from him is that very likely retail shareholder value was destroyed by the actions of Australian Super.
Senator Bragg may be proven wrong again.
I mean, maybe, indeed. But I guess I'm just talking about in that context of the political debate. Having a seat on a board for an industry super fund, do you think that it potentially makes things a lot more difficult right now?
I'm going to kind of duck the political part of this and just go back to some basic principles of directors' duties. The fiduciary duties that any director on a board has is to the company and its shareholders, not to be able to represent universally its own. So I think if you appoint, I think my colleagues here would be in agreement. You make a good appointment to a board for many, many reasons, in addition to the reason you might have as a shareholder, but that director must perform their duties in the best interests of the company, and that means you may be solving for other problems like gender diversity or lack of tech skills, whatever it might be. So if we were appointing people to boards and then they breached their directors' duties and we were in trouble with ASIC, then that would be a very bad outcome. But that's not what's going on. That is, and like Paul, and I think Sonia as well, we are all building the most incredible ecosystems of directors who want to represent the money as it's flowing around the direct and the listed and unlisted sector. And we actually think that if you could build a cohort of directors with the best directors' skills and understand their fiduciary duties and all the risks that come with that and all of the regulatory requirements, and they sit on boards of our direct investment, then they are better investments because we've got people there who actually understand what it means to be a great director, and they're working with one another in a pool of directors to share insights on things like safety, or how's that climate transition going, or what I'm learning on this board. And that's what we're doing at Aware. We have an ecosystem of directors who may serve on several direct assets, unlisted, and we bring them together once every 6 months to have a conversation on a big topic where there's concerns. Psychosocial issues of workplace health and safety. How are boards dealing with that? So we get the directors together for that. How are we dealing with positive duty on eliminating harassment? Let's get directors talking about that. Tech and AI. Fantastic. And I don't see that happening in many places where you get a group of highly skilled directors talking together about the big issues of governance, becoming better stewards, and we're able to do that because we take very seriously our responsibility on behalf of our members.
You are obviously all the investors, so I want to ask you about the environment in a minute, but I'll just take this question from the floor. It's an interesting one. As more Australians retire, it's becoming more obvious that super funds need to be service providers, not just money managers. Yep. Are the funds ready for that? We touched on this earlier today, but this mass transition to decumulation. Sonia, if I start with you.
Yeah, there is this huge capital wave which really starts to come through, I think, over the next sort of 40 years, really, where we're starting to see a huge transition to decumulation. And look, I think pension funds have been thinking about this for a long time in some ways. Like, we've always known that our whole entire sort of raison d'etre is to provide retirement income for our members. And I think we've all built incredibly sophisticated member journeys through that to provide the sort of service and support the members need, obviously the financial planning advice that they need to help them through that journey. I think what's becoming exciting is that the scale is starting to change. And so the scale of numbers that are coming through, both in terms of members and capital, is really starting to make new options and new innovations possible and plausible. And I think that's what most funds are now looking at, is like, what does it look like today, but with both in terms of scale, but also in terms of technology and just how much that's advancing. What could it look like into the future? So I'm really excited about where the retirement journey will go for members over the next decade.
I wouldn't mind just saying that there's a few things we're not good enough yet at, and actually the one that I'm the most focused on, and would be one of the things that keeps me awake at night, or at least wakes me. If I wake up, I can't go back to sleep because I can easily go to sleep any time. It could be now. Is payments, right? So we've been really good at encouraging people to make contributions. We've been really good at making investment switches. We've been very good at helping invest for people, crediting rates, unit pricing, all like in the savings in investment side. We've been really good, but actually most of the complaints I get are about retirement, actually. So I need $17,000 to repair our caravan because we're going on a trip on Thursday, and I contacted you on Tuesday, and I still haven't got the money, and it's today that I have to go. Or we've had some troubles with paying death claims quickly enough, and that's like the worst time in the organisation's life to get something wrong, and I feel really quite sick about that. And there was one member, her name was Philippa, and her husband Peter had died, and she just said, I don't know how to get this happening. Yeah. So we do need to be much better at service, and we're all focused on it. We're all focused on it, but the idea of making payments to people, I think we're good at making payments to each other. Like, I think if someone says, I want to leave the fund and leave another fund, we've got 72 hours to do it, and we do a good job. But the thing that makes me feel really uncomfortable is it's the members' money. They want their money, and we need to be able to make sure that they can get it really quickly and smoothly and directly. Now we all worry about security and does it get sent to the wrong person, and with the distribution of beneficiaries at a death, that's also really complicated. But we spend, I think, a lot more time thinking about the complications involved than the fact that it's just the members' money. How do we give them their money?
It is the whole retirement payments product.
I think Paul points to something that we've got to be really honest about in this audience, and that is we have been brilliant accumulators. We've been brilliant investors. We've been very concerned about that accumulation phase of the last 30 years and what has snuck up on us with the 5 million people now going to retirement, and those that are going to be thinking about retirement much earlier, like in their 40s and early 50s, not at retirement age. We've got to be the best at standing beside our members for their retirement whenever they ask us to help them. Now, that is a complete switch in the skill set sitting in our sector. I'm really proud of the work that Deanne Stewart does at Aware. We invested 3 years ago in a platform, the tech platform, to make that possible. And you've got to take some really hard decisions through very different valleys of risk to actually believe that those investments are exactly what's needed to be able to be more bespoke using automation to understand your members. I was on a double jacking this morning in the member services team at Aware, and when you hear the calls coming through, it's exactly as you said. It could be someone very old saying, I just need to get some money out, and why is this so hard? Or someone who rings and says, I'm beginning to think about accumulation, and we've now got an app where you can do a confidence score on whether you've got enough money to retire at a certain age, and you can play with that, because that's what the automation's allowing us to do. But we've had to manage that incredibly carefully against a background of an industry that was just really great at accumulating and investing. And I think this is our big challenge at the moment, Ali. And I think we all want to be in a contest for this for the best possible reasons, because that's our job now, is to stand by people as they think about and go into retirement.
I guess, is that also an issue where as you get bigger and you also get closer to your individual members, you have a higher risk? You're going to be required to provide much more bespoke attention to people as they decumulate, if you like. Do you see that, Sam, as being a much more high-risk scenario than it has been?
We know that the higher touch points you have with members, the more likely you are to make some errors along the way, and more likely that will become something that's brought to the attention of the regulators. And you mentioned death benefits. We know that regulators are looking at how we handle that because of a protection of the essence of what members expect of us. And there will be lots and lots of focus and scrutiny on us, as there should be. But we're entering into that phase where we have to be better and better. And we have to have really good conversations with our members about what is a mistake, how quickly do we fix it, what's our internal dispute resolution processes, and how do our members come to trust that. That's the business we're in now, though, and it is more complex. It will require different people coming into the sector, into our funds, who actually are very clear about customer service and about what does retirement really look like, not just releasing money, but actually giving advice within the bounds of advice giving and keeping fees down, so that our members make really good decisions about the best possible dignified retirement. But of course, the risk rises. But if we're good about our how we actually think about responsible stewardship, we've got to be looking at that all the time. Our board looks at that a lot.
I just want to touch on a couple of other issues. And Sonia, you did say to me that performance is one of the issues that keeps you awake, your Chief Investment Officer. Just a quick, we haven't really looked at this today, but a very quick idea of how you see the investment outlook at the moment.
Yeah. And look, performance is, you're right, it's always on my mind. But I think especially at the moment, we go back to, we're here to provide retirement incomes, and we've just been through a period of incredibly heightened inflation. And so even though we're all printing, really strong numbers, the real returns we've been generating over the past 5 years are still relatively soft. And so, real returns are what our members eat in retirement, we know that. And so really facing into that truth and thinking deeply about how do we build portfolios that can be more resilient into the future. So the outlook from here, we all know we're on the end of what has been a fairly aggressive cash rate hiking cycle. We know why we've done that. I just talked about inflation. It's really designed to try and slow inflation and slow the economy and slow demand. That has been more successful in some markets. Obviously, we've seen Europe going into recession and really sort of suffering some demand destruction there. In Australia, we're starting to see a much softer household, a bit of a binary environment where those that are sort of struggling under cost of living are really struggling. Those that are employed and maybe have paid off their mortgage are actually doing quite well and suddenly are getting income again. And that makes it a really difficult job for the RBA to actually navigate that dynamic. But ultimately the RBA will do what they have to do to navigate into an environment where inflation gets back within their band and employment is as robust as it can be in that environment.
And what does that mean for you as a super fund?
Well, look, I think it means that there's volatility ahead. I think the reality is, it's very rare for the central banks to navigate this sort of demand destruction without causing a recession. There have been, the odd example where that has occurred. I'd go back to the mid-90s in the US, but it's rare. And I think we're all going into this eyes wide open. There's a lot of reasons why you perhaps for optimism as well. So, I don't want to leave everybody gloomy. I think the optimism is obviously around, it's been a really sort of desynchronised cycle. We obviously saw an energy recession a couple of years ago. We've seen a really soft consumer in the last 12 months. Some of these events are actually coming out and working out the other side. We've seen corporate balance sheets really strong. So, and obviously the big, sort of question mark now is just when do we see productivity gains from artificial intelligence? And we're thinking that's probably not the next sort of few years, but with a 10-year view, that could be really exciting. So look, I think as an investor, we're navigating that, positioning the portfolio to try and take advantage of those dynamics, and I think try and drive that performance.
Ali, I think there's.
We are almost out of time. Obviously.
Sure. I was just going to say that we often talk about being long-term investors, but then we often don't talk about it like long-term investors. So I think if you had $50,000 in most of our funds in 2001, it's going to be worth more than $200,000 in 2021. So, we could use different numbers for each of us. But if you think about that 20-year period, there's the end of 9/11, there's Brexit, there's a Greek debt crisis, there's 2 major wars. And so I would just urge people to, we have experts who are spending all of their time thinking about asset allocation and asset classes and security selection. But in the longer run, provided you have a good globally diversified portfolio and you're thinking about these things all the time, most of these bumps wash out.
As long as you don't retire immediately after a very big bump.
Correct.
I just want to, this is a very popular question here, so I want to, Sam, I'll put it to you. How do you see your asset managers best supporting your fund objectives? What does best practice partnership look like?
So, I guess I'm thinking about how to answer that. I think we just have enormous confidence. So first of all, there's a separation of the board is not engaged in the business of investment mandate, so that we make sure that is done through Dee and the investment team. We've got a strong set of purpose. We've just renewed our strategy for the next 5 years. It's clear what we're asking our investor group, our fund managers to do.
Are you all in-house?
We're all in-house.
Yes, so that makes a far lesser challenge.
So they know, and they're working really hard, as Paul said, to make sure that diversified, the things they are concerned about, taking into account all of those responsibility principles, can be at the forefront of their mind, in addition to the return that we expect. So I'm not sure I've answered that question.
No, I think it's probably a better question.
I think it's for
Paul and
those
Sonia.
that are, yeah.
Do you want to answer it?
Would you like to say it again?
Yes. It's a question around your asset managers and how, and of course I can't because it's now disappeared,
Sure.
but it's basically how can they best support you? What's best practice?
Yeah, I think it is complicated for us because we're almost entirely internalised in Aussie equities, if not all, mostly on that path as well. But the best thing any of our partners can do is to say, what are we here to do? We're here to help members achieve their best financial position in retirement. And the more alignment around that idea, the better.
Same for you?
Yeah.
You're not entirely internal, are you? You're actually...
We're a mix, yeah. And I would say, generate performance, provide insight. I think most of our managers are in niche areas and we rely on them both for both of those things.
Just a final takeaway from each of you. Obviously, there's been a lot that we haven't covered, but is there something that you want people in the room to walk away with, something that they should think about that maybe will be top of mind for you, as opposed to all the normal things that are top of mind, but will be top of mind in the next 12 months or so? I didn't give you any warning of that question. Sam?
I think I've probably said it a few times already. I think opening up I worry that we don't have enough of a sophisticated, generous, engaged conversation with Australians about what this system is all about. I think the more we talk about the value that this is creating for the future dignified retirement of Australians and how important that is for the future of the economy and for our society, that matters, that conversation matters. And every time I meet a young person, I see them regularly who say, I just want to take mine out because I want the deposit for the house. I just take the moment to say, can we compare the value of that money invested compounding with us versus giving it to a bank and taking out a loan and paying interest to the bank and hoping that other asset will see you through. And when you start that conversation, a lot of young people say, oh, now I get it. it's actually just not sitting there doing nothing. It's really important to me, and I can actually find other ways to handle this housing issue, subject to, as Paula said, governments figuring this out. That's not for us to have to do. We've got to be there in different ways. But I think a more generous, engaged conversation from everybody about a system that is delivering incredible returns to this country. And there's so much great stuff to talk about without going to binary views about industry versus other forms of super, and ascribing a stereotype based on the history of super, looking at what it's doing right now.
And I would say, thinking about the people in this room, there's enormous capital, and the allocation of capital can be an enormous force for good. So we can make more productive companies, we can make things happen, we can speak up for the things that need to be spoken up for, and they're all entirely legitimate things for us to be doing. So I think there's just an enormous amount of work that's being done that's under-recognised, which is super in itself, as long as there's people speaking for those things and allocating capital. There's an enormous role here to improve companies, improve society, change the world, and only to help people have a better life in retirement.
And I would add on that, I think for us, we do represent over 1 million Australians. It's important for us to keep close to what they want. I think that social licence, is moving quickly. I think people really care deeply about how their superannuation is invested and how it is having an impact. And making sure that we, I think ASIC said it nicely, that we're telling our story really clearly, that we're evidencing that we do what we said we would do, and that we're having the impact that they expect. I think that will only heighten over the next year and beyond.
Which goes to Sam's point. Yeah, send a message. Please join me in thanking our panel very much for their insights this afternoon.